The world is going through changes happening at a speed that we have never seen before. This is leading to disruption, chaos, panic, fear, hysteria, and a turbulent economy and marketplace. How do you protect your wealth in a turbulent world? How do you invest for cash flow in alternative assets to escape the rat race in times of uncertainty? How do you decentralize yourself, your family, your community, your business, and your investments to become sovereign and escape the matrix? If you are looking for strategies, tactics, and techniques to escape the rat race and matrix, you are in the right place. My name is MC Lobsher, and this is Cashflow Ninja. This is Cashflow Ninja. I'm MC Lobsher. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode and spending your most valuable resource, your time, once again with me. Everything Cashflow Ninja is at cashflowninja.com. There's 3 shows: Cashflow Ninja, Cashflow Investing Secrets, and Reset Investing Secrets. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter, the Best Cashflow Niches newsletter, in which I share one brand new, well-researched cashflow niche every single month, and you can join our mastermind, Cashflow Nirvana, which is a community of business owners and investors looking to protect wealth during turbulent times. All of this is available at cashflowninja.com. I've got a fantastic show for you today. I'm joined by Louis O'Connor from Strategic Metals Invest. Louis has been on the show several times, sharing more about strategic metals, also known as rare earth metals. There's been a lot of stuff happening in that asset class and in that specific niche, and I can't wait for Louis to give us an update. Louis, it's great to see you.
You too, MC. Good to be here. Thank you.
Now, as I've shared in the intro, for folks that have not listened to any of Louis O'Connor's previous episodes covering strategic metals, we highly recommend you go to cashflowninja.com and check it out, because we really deep dive into this asset class and this specific niche. But Louis, for all of our new listeners and viewers that's not familiar with you and what you do, can you please share a little bit about your background and what you're up to these days and what you do and how you help people?
Sure, will do, MC. I'll be happy to. So I'm Louis O'Connor. My business my company is Strategic Metals Invest. We are the only global supplier who has this opportunity to private investors. So our core business is we buy rare earth elements and technology metals from producers, mostly in China, because China dominates the industry, and we resell them then to industry buyers in more than 70 different countries. But that's not really what we'll be talking about today, because it's our side business, which is we have an offer to private investors. But I mention our core business because if we weren't in this industry, there's no way we could safely offer private investors these raw materials. Another short way to put it is on my smartphone or anybody's smartphone, there's 12 precious metals, also known as strategic metals. They're just umbrella terms. So one is gold and one is silver. It's the other 10 that are in your phone that we'll talk about today. And it's funny, we touch and see them and feel them every day, but probably don't think about them. Like indium, for example, you can swipe your phone because of indium and the little magnets in the speaker. So we'll be talking about the metals that we touch, see, feed. They're critical to economic prosperity, military capabilities, but they're also now available as physical assets.
So for new listeners and for viewers, so rare earth metals and strategic metals is an asset class a little bit different to gold and silver. A lot of people know about commodities, gold, silver, and all the other commodities, copper, and maybe they've heard of lithium too, because that's been in the news, especially when it comes to electrical vehicles and so forth. So rare earth metals, strategic metals are all of these very, very different kind of commodities that's used in everything that we basically depend on and use currently. So as Louis just mentioned, cell phones. If you look at your cell phones or your tablets, It's in there. There's a lot of applications in AI, in military, in healthcare. So all of the markets that are growing, and not just growing, they're exponentially growing. They use these rare earth metals, these strategic metals. So there's been a massive demand for this. And if you look into the future, and you look at where things are headed with regards to, I mean, whether it's electrical vehicles, whether it's AI, whether it's military development and weapons and that kind of stuff, and healthcare, those are booming industries, and they're continuing to grow. So the demand will keep increasing. So that's why there was a lot of excitement about it, but not a lot of people know about it. Now, there are, as with any asset class and any niche, obviously a dynamic in the marketplace, which has been very, very interesting. And Louis spoke on a previous episode about the China-US quote unquote Cold War or war in this space. Louis, do you just want to share and just recap what maybe talk about that, and kind of where that fits in and some of the developments on it? Because some of the things that are happening right now are things that you spoke about almost a year ago, maybe more than a year ago. Time flies when you're having fun, on the show.
Yes, indeed, MC. Yeah, it is. It's just a little over a year ago, and it's interesting what we cover a bit later. What we spoke about then, as we sort of made a prediction that this tensions could escalate, and China sort of holds some aces up their sleeve, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But yeah, the easiest, or probably the quickest definition of these raw materials are that they are the backbone of manufacturing in the 21st century. And behind everything nowadays is technology. We live in the technology age. And just so there's no confusions, for example, precious metals fall under the same umbrella term, and even strategic metals. People sometimes call them technology metals or defense metals, aviation, but literally it might sound like there's, hundreds of these metals. There's not. There's only 17 rare earth elements. And 7 of them are not all that rare. And there's another 10 that we'll be talking about, which, there's not an industry that does not use. You just mentioned, pretty much most of them, but they are the backbone of manufacturing. They're critical to all nations' economic prosperity and increasingly military capabilities. And I suppose why we're here today to sort of some big news, and it even made the mainstream news in North America and Europe in the last few weeks, is that China has banned or restricted, I should say, the export of 2 technology metals. These are gallium and germanium, and these are 2 metals we offer to private investors as well as to industry. Now, this is a retaliatory measure on China's part, or at least, that's the way they see it. What happened earlier in the summer was the US initiated a block on the most advanced computer chip, the most advanced technology for computer chips getting to China. And that ban was supported by Holland and Japan. So as you sort of touched on briefly, what we're really at the beginning of here is what you could call it, somebody's called it the Cold War 2.0. Except this time it's not an arms race. It's a race for computer chips. It's a race for supremacy over computer chips. Interestingly, the West, US, Japan, China have the technology. They're the most advanced technology, but China has all the raw materials. Gallium, for example, 98% of the global supply of gallium comes from China. So, essentially speaking, we in the West wait in line for what China will export after they've sort of satisfied their own domestic quotas. And now, the sort of political landscape is playing an increasing part, and China has really stepped it up by saying, we're going to restrict the export of these raw materials to certain countries, the US being one of them.
I want to take a moment to share something very important right now. Are you trying to figure out how to protect your savings from the banking collapse, which has already started, and the coming financial crisis. Most banks will fail. Deposits that are not insured by the FDIC will be lost, and there will be bank bail-ins. And this collapse in the banking system will lead to chaos in the financial system. Banks also provide loans to real estate investors. So, what do you think is going to happen to lending in the event of a banking and a financial crisis? You can be proactive and position your savings to protect it and also have access to it to use it to buy discounted assets by positioning it in your own banking system through the infinite banking concept strategy. Producers Wealth has put together a presentation at yourownbankingsystem.com where you will learn how to position capital outside of the banking system and the Wall Street casino, just like the ultra wealthy, to protect it and create a pool of tax-free liquid capital to capitalize on the massive opportunity to buy discounted assets, which is coming. You can access the presentation at yourownbankingsystem.com. That's yourownbankingsystem.com. And I mean, if you think about it, I actually, it's a pretty good term, the Cold War 2.0, because energy, of course, is what any nation or country needs for security. But this is now basically ranking right up there because if you, like you said, from a manufacturing standpoint, these metals are used in technology, which this is it. I mean, AI, and so forth. In the technology age, this is definitely needed for a security of a nation. And of course, I mean, the development of weaponry in of course, military applications. So, I mean, I can. This is a pretty big deal, and the resource war's been going on for a while. Seeing what's happening in Africa, and it looks like China wrapped that up pretty quickly. And with South Africa, one of the largest economies falling into the BRICS group and kind of that block, it took one of the largest economies, which is I would guess semi-functioning, took that off the table. So no wonder there's kind of a huge grab now going on in Niger, where it looks like the West is really trying to just hold on to whatever they have left over there. Most people don't know about that. There's been a war going on for control of Africa because of all the resources that they have, and there's a lot of obviously resources coming out of Africa. But this is obviously huge and pretty big news. So how does this, what are some of the implications of this, and how does this play into like the larger scale of, the bigger picture, I guess, when it comes to strategic metals?
Sure. Well, I mean, from my business is we offer these, metals to private investors. So it's good news purely from an investment perspective. Obviously, the prices are rising, So what a lot of people wouldn't know, I suppose, is that out of these 10, like China understood, I think, long before the US and Europe and, the West of the world, that these raw materials would be the backbone of manufacturing in the 21st century. Now, they understood this back in the late 80s. In fact, Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese premier at the time, who's considered the architect of modern China, standing on a rare earth mine in 1987, said, the Middle East has oil, China has rare earth. So, they didn't sort of solidify this position in a couple of years. This is a 25 year in the making, and they've still a long way to go. And I suppose, what it is, I think, MC, as well, is, sometimes not even just, in supply chain, but life in general, sometimes we make a decision that seems like a good decision, but way further down the line, we go, there's consequences we don't foresee. And I think what's happened globally is that for the last few decades, since the 1980s, we've been sort of high, if you will, on the globalization drug. right? Remember the 80s, the 90s, global economy. We were a little bit high on that. And somehow I think we forgot that it's not a good idea to allow one nation control the supply of, say, one or more raw materials that are critical to all nations' economic prosperity. And that's what happened. I mean, out of the 10 metals that we offer, 7 of them, China produces 90% or more of 7 of them.
Wow.
And at the moment, they've only restricted 2. There's another 5, and those 5 are the energy transition metals. So they're critical to electric cars, solar power, wind power, but also next generation, the sort of wearable medical devices. Look, they're critical to a nation's economic prosperity. It means everything, you know. So what's happening now is tensions are manifest and escalating. I mean, I was recently interviewed on CNBC right after the U.S. Commerce Secretary. She was in Beijing at the time. So for this summer alone, there was 3 high-level U.S. government executives or ministers in China trying to de-escalate this, because if they keep ramping it up and China continues, we're going to see massive shortages. And of course, from our point of view, for investors who own these assets, they'll be in possession of assets that are in huge demand, where all of a sudden supply is literally has been taken,
Yeah. What are some of the other countries that are producers of these strategic metals?
Well, so China, hafnium, for example, China produces, but also hafnium can be you can in France and Germany and some other parts of the world. But you know what's funny as well, though, MC, this is the broader picture again. Like, Chinese only produce enough hafnium for their own domestic use, so it's not really an issue there. Yet, hafnium sort of went up about 180% in value last year. Now, why is that when it's also available in other places? It's simply because we don't have enough raw materials for this so-called energy transition. All car manufacturers their goal is to be fully electric by 2030. Solar, wind. There's just not enough of these raw materials. So even when, it's one thing that China dominates, gallium and germanium and dysprosium, but even with that, bearing that in mind, we're still going to be short on these raw materials, because if you think of this global transition, I mean, I'll give you one small example. Austria, which is, one small country in Europe, 9 million people, I think, is the population. And if you look at Austria's goals for this transition to, low carbon economy, in order for them to meet their goals, they would need, in 2030, they would need the current global supply of gallium just for that one country, right? So it's just there's just not going to be enough to go around, And this is the same raw material where China is responsible for 95% of production, and they have big plans themselves. Like, now that China dominates these essential raw materials, their plan now is to move up the value chain. So, the solar panels, China is going to produce 9 million electric cars this year. They're the biggest producer of electric cars. When Deng Xiaoping went to Detroit in the 1970s, China didn't produce one car, and he was at the Ford Motor Company factory, and he said, "We're here to learn." And I'll tell you, they have learned. It's just, he's the same guy that said as well. He said, "No matter if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches the mice," and they're catching the mice.
I want to acknowledge one of our sponsors. Are you ready to ride the wave of success in the booming car wash industry? Tommy's Express Car Wash is the cutting-edge brand that is revolutionizing the way we clean vehicles. Demand for top-notch, state-of-the-art tunnel car wash is skyrocketing. Institutions are diving in head first, and the real asset investor is already a step ahead. They have a world-class operations team, and they're building a portfolio of Tommy's Express car washes that's on track to become one of the largest privately owned car wash portfolios in the United States. The margins on a stabilized Tommy's Express car wash are incredible, and accredited investors have the chance to join them on their adventure. Dave Zook, the founder and CEO of The Real Asset Investor, and his team are thrilled to share opportunities like Tommy's Car Wash with accredited investors that boost your cash flow, unlocks massive tax benefits, and get you set up for a lucrative exit just a few years from now. To learn more about the opportunities offered by The Real Asset Investor, you can reach out to them at info@therealassetinvestor.com. That's info@therealassetinvestor.com. Yeah. So there's a lot going on with this, this movement, this to a new system, right? This transition to this new energy system, and it's going to create a lot of bottlenecks. I mean, just looking at the big picture here, you can already see, all right, well, they want to move to electrical cars and, wind and solar and so forth, but there's not enough raw materials. There's not enough resources to do it for the entire world. Not going to happen. It's a math problem. It's not
exactly.
It's not something that, what we would like this, it's just math. It can't be done. It's going to take much longer to build out a grid like this. So it's going to create huge bottlenecks. And then the other thing too, if you look at the energy grid now, in some of the recent studies that have come out, if everybody switches over to electrical cars in the United States, for example, the average household's bill, their electrical use is going to look like they're running 25 refrigerators on average, monthly, just from continuously charging. Let's just say they have 2 cars per household. So there's no way an electrical grid can even handle that. There's just no way. So a lot of this is a mathematical problem, but in the process, there's a lot of bottlenecks, which creates a lot of opportunity for folks that are positioned well and do see what's happening from a big picture standpoint, in reality, not just on a ideological basis, right?
Yeah, well, look, it's a great dynamic. Increased demand, limited supply equals potential for profit. There's no question. As we talked about, it's a simple mathematical equation, and China has sort of won this war. It's funny though, if you look at in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act, despite the name, it's all about energy transition. Yep. 390 billion available or up for grabs, for subsidies, but politicians don't understand resource, economics or energy economics or, supply chain economics. And there's, it took China a generation to get to this position. It'll take, 15, 20 years to get out of it. And in the meantime, there will be bottlenecks, supply will be disrupted. Somebody actually, a gentleman from the US who I would consider probably a foremost authority in rare earths, said to me, and he's very, very serious. He said, there's not enough for these car manufacturers to go electric. He said, so between now and 2035, he made a prediction. He said that 1 or 2 of these car manufacturers that we know and love that have been around from, since time began, they will go out of business. He said there's not enough resources for all of them to go electric. It's just not happening, which also means that we're not going, that we'll still have a need and a use for oil and gas and, other forms of energy. It's just, there's not enough resources. That's it.
Right. It's almost like it ties into the other themes in other industries too, that I can see in the car, staying on the topic of the cars. I call it the great consolidation. Because it looks like if you're seeing what's happening in the banking system behind the scenes, this will come to the forefront. I think here in the next couple of months, you're going to see a massive consolidation of banks. There's going to be a ton of banks, just like 2008, where there were big banks that were household names that they've almost been forgotten. I think one of my first mortgages, for example, was like with Washington Mutual or something like that. That bank, that Washington Bank, Washington Mutual Bank, it doesn't even WAMU, it doesn't even exist anymore. That was wiped out in 2008. You're going to see the same thing here in the banks. Back to the cars, probably going to see the same thing in the cars. Like you said, there's not enough to go around. So folks that are ahead of the curve and have locked down supply early, they're probably going to survive and stay alive. And the other folks that were too late to the game might be out of the game. There might not be a chair left after the music stops.
Yeah, exactly. I consider this as sort of a niche, looking for, path of progress, which is what area or what industry is increasing in demand that could be where supply could be subject to disruption or could also be limited, and this is one of them. The biggest obstacle, though, I find, is obviously it's a relatively new asset class, and most people are not aware they can physically own gallium. They know they can maybe invest in a mine or shares in a company, but we actually offer physical assets, exactly the same paradigm as owning gold or silver. You physically own the asset and store it, and then we then provide the exit by mediating a sale to an industry buyer. So people have to be careful. Obviously, we're the only, as I mentioned at the very beginning, that our core business is we are an industry supplier. And if that wasn't the case, this wouldn't be safe, because unless you're not even have a link to the industry, unless you're in the industry, it's a very closed industry, if you will. The US Department of Defense, for example, there's 3/4 of a ton of rare earths in one F-35 fighter jet. They're not just going to buy, gallium or indium from somebody who calls them up and says, "Oh, I have gallium." They're only going to deal with reputable suppliers who they know on long term for, chain of custody and purity level. So it's quite a closed industry, and I know I'm quite certain when I say that we're the only supplier that's in the industry that invites investors in to purchase, industrial grade gallium or indium or dysprosium, hold it as a physical asset, and then when they're ready to liquidate, we provide the exit. We'll mediate a sale to an industry buyer, or we buy it for our own inventory. And needless to say, the gains for the last few years have been very good, but this is a long run. I mean, the estimate for energy transition metals to peak is not until the 2040s. So, and then if China tightens its grip a bit more, we're seeing price increases at the moment with restrictions. But if this goes up another, if tensions escalate further and they start to say restrict or even outright, then definitely you'll see prices go off the charts. It happened once before, MC, in 2011. So over a decade ago, the Chinese and the Japanese, there was a territorial dispute over waters. And the Japanese actually, and you can Google this, you'll see it, they detained the captain of a Chinese trawler. They grabbed him. And in retaliation, the Chinese restricted the export of these same metals to Japan. And we saw prices like 5x in the space of a few months, And so they have the power to control the price. But either way, I mean, China needs these for their own domestic supply. Anyway, no matter what happens, these raw materials are in demand and in short supply.
Yeah, on the back to the Cold War 2.0, which I think could go hot at any moment too, by the way. If you look at all the training exercises that's being done, or just right by Taiwan, you've got the US and NATO allies doing a ton of exercises. There you have military support from the United States going to Taiwan, financial support, weapons, all that kind of stuff. And then there was recently a exercise that Russia did with China off the coast of Alaska. So you got all, I mean, in Africa, you say, there's a saying, you don't tickle a lion by the nose, because at some stage it's going to bite. And there's a lot of tickling of noses here of big lions from both parties. At some stage, somebody's going to bite, right? So it looks like tensions are just escalating.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you named it there with Taiwan, and what I'm not sure if people would be aware, but the main reason, I mean, the reason the US and China would be willing to go to war in Taiwan, it's over it's computer chips. It's
Yep.
I don't know people know the TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company. They produce, I think, 92% of the most advanced, chips in the world. They have the most advanced technology. They're about 10 years ahead of China. They're, maybe, even further ahead than the US and Europe. So this Taiwanese, and they're actually going to maybe build a plant in the US, I think. So it's all, as you said, the Cold War 2.0, it's not an arms race, it's a semiconductor race, it's a computer chip race. Taiwan has the most advanced technology, but China has the raw materials. So that's why they'd be willing to go to war over this. And the reason, China's banned gallium and germanium, it's a retaliatory measure because the US and other countries, but it's tit for tat, like you can't say, oh, it's like any of these situations. You did this and then we did this, and they forget really, who's doing what. But the US has actively blocked the most advanced technology from getting to China, because then they obviously have dual purposes as well, civilian and military use. So I would say tensions are more manifest and escalating, in the last year since I last spoke to you than they have ever been. And now we're seeing some real moves from China because, if they were to outright ban gallium, I mean, the effect that would have economically, is catastrophic, like globally on a global scale.
Yeah. So there is potential too that they ban the other ones too. If this just escalates, right? And eventually there's a hot war, which, as I mentioned, the military exercises on both parties, tickling the nose of the other party, the lion ready to bite. It's just escalating. And then of course we've had former generals come out in the United States saying that, war is eventually inevitable. So that is a scenario if a war goes from cold to hot, that they might be, shutting off more and more of these strategic metals to the rest, the West, the United States, and the rest of the world.
Yeah, at the moment, so as I mentioned, like there's 10 what you would call, 4 of them are technology metals. Germanium and gallium are technology metals, and then there's the rare earth elements. So there's 7 of them where China is producing globally 90% or more. So maybe 92% or 95%, but in gallium it's 98%. So we knew sort of months ago that China had put plans in place to restrict the export of gallium and germanium, and they announced it in July. They said, as of August 1st, we will restrict, these 2 raw materials. But we also know already that China has plans to, before the end of this year, so in the next 3 to 4 months, I think if things continue to escalate, they have plans to also restrict dysprosium, praseodymium, neodymium, terbium, and indium. And those are all either energy transition metals or technology metals. So again, literally the backbone of all manufacturing. Now, Biden and the Chinese premier are set to meet in November. I think that'll be the crunch date. If that doesn't, if things don't de-escalate, if you will, then I think China will, they've already shown their willingness to do it with 2, and they may do it with another 5. And again, from our point of view, just purely as investors that own these raw materials, this is good news for us. And even if that doesn't happen, there's still demand there's just not enough anyway. So either way, holding these raw materials it couldn't be a safer bet, really.
I want to take a moment to recognize one of our sponsors, Penumbra Solutions. Life Settlements investments have allowed financial and banking institutions to not only buy their equity contractually, but also diversify their capital from any economic, market, and geopolitical risk. It's been part of the billion-dollar blueprint followed by institutional investors. If you're an accredited investor, you can also now participate in this vehicle with enormous growth potential. You can watch an informational webinar presented by one of the premier organizations providing live settlement investments, Penumbra Solutions, at cashflowninja.com/live settlements. That's cashflowninja.com/live settlements. The password to access that webinar is Penumbra, all lowercase. And I just want to say, like investment options, there's obviously ways to do it through equities and that kind of stuff and trading, which, not financial advice at all. Just speaking for myself, I preferred, and listeners and viewers know this, like we're all investing in the alternative asset space. So the allure of the alternative asset investment space is direct ownership in investment, right? So that's the other way to do it. So similar to gold and silver, which you can buy and warehouse and store with a custodian, there's similar services obviously available to these. So it's not something that you buy and have you shipped to your house. That would destroy the value of it. Correct? All right, Louis. You can't buy it and warehouse it yourself. It has to be warehoused in a specific manner for the buyers that use this in manufacturing to do that. Yeah. This is interesting. This is very, very interesting stuff. It's interesting to see that even in a very chaotic world, there's a ton of opportunities because of bottlenecks. So that's what I say to investors. We are, and for our listeners and our viewers, we tell you what's going on, what we're seeing out there, and not all of it is great news, by the way. That spoiler alert to folks that have followed us for a while and listened to the show. It's not all good news, but if you recognize what's going on, and you see what's happening, once you see all of the dangers and the threats out there, you and recognize them for what they are, you're also going to start to see opportunities and bottlenecks. And this is one specific asset class and niche where there's massive opportunity because of the distortions that's going on globally.
Yeah, well, MC, just as you said there, I mean, the fact that we're here today, a year, a little bit over a year, when we first spoke, I remember when I was first telling you about rare earths, I could see your curiosity, sort of spark. And you even you were asking me the right questions anyway about, well, then couldn't China do this and do that? And what I remember exactly, you asked me, could China, how much of this market do they control? And I said, look, what they could do at any time is restrict or ban the export of these raw materials. And I'm not sure. I mean, people at the time might have thought, well, Louis and MC are, I don't know what they're smoking today, but they're predicting these geopolitical strategies, but we're not. We just recognized a dynamic where, sorry, the phone rang. We're just recognizing a dynamic where demand is increasing and supply is limited. And, just to prove your point, what we said might happen has happened. It's happening right now.
So if we look ahead of trends in motion and things that are in motion, what are some of the things that you're seeing, in the next, for the rest of the year, in the next 6 months to a year in this space?
Well, I mean, since August 1st, I mean, the prices for germanium and gallium are increasing, however, the other raw materials I mentioned are also increasing because I think nations, corporations, are starting to stockpile. So even if China, because the tension and the threat is so manifest, the prices are rising. I think we're going to see a lot of stockpiling. So I'd say for the next, indefinite sort of, time frame, we're going to see continued increases. But again, coming back to the idea that, for us to try and do what we think we can do in terms of energy transition, there's not enough raw materials. So, we're not going to, this idea really of green energy it's not a very true statement, because I mean, you have to mine these raw materials anyway for green energy. But the idea that we're going to go completely, to a green economy is just not true, because we won't have enough raw materials. But what I would say is, if China does continue to restrict, then from our point of view, from investors' point of view, they'll see fantastic increases, because you'll be sitting on a raw material that every manufacturer needs, and they're in China and they're not being exported.
Yeah. Louis, this has been great. I really appreciate you giving us an update on strategic metals. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, please check out all of Louis O'Connor's previous episodes at cashflowninja.com, where he really deep dives into this asset class and this specific niche. Louis, where can my listeners and my viewers, where can they connect with you? Where can they reach out and learn more? I believe you've got a report and so forth. Where can they get in touch if they're interested in exploring more of strategic metals?
Well, if somebody emails me and just mentions you by name, MC, I'll be, we'll obviously look after them. So that would be Louis, Louis, at strategicmetalsinvest.com. Or if somebody just wants to learn more, they could go to the website, www.strategicmetalsinvest.com, and download a brochure, and they can sort of gather all the information they need there. We update it very, prices are updated weekly.
Fantastic. Louis, appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on to the show again. And as always, providing massive value, sharing your knowledge and your insights. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much, MC.
Thank you to all of our listeners and our viewers for spending your most valuable resource, your time, once again with me. Everything Cashflow Ninja is at cashflowninja.com. Until next time, live infinitely. This presentation is for educational and informational purposes only. The information being presented and considered does not consider your particular financial objectives or situation, and it does not make personalized recommendations. This material is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified tax and legal advisor or other qualified professionals, and you should not use the information in place of a customized consultation with a licensed professional regarding your specific personal financial objectives, situation, and needs. We believe the information provided is reliable, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, timeliness, or completeness.